Ezra Hashem, today in Masechah Shabbos, we're going to be learning Gimel Amud Beis 3b, and we're starting at the two dots, about a quarter of the way down the page. Amar Abaye. Gimel Amud Beis, Amar Abaye. Fascinating discussion we're going to have today. Abaye is going to pose a question regarding the status of a hand in halacha. What type of a reshuyos is your hand deemed? We're going to have an attempted resolution and 5 pirchas to the resolution. That's what we're going to have today. So let me explain this outside and then we'll see it inside. I thought this was fascinating. We know midairaisa, I'm pulling the table. Midairaisa, we have reshus harabim. What? What happened? Nothing. Midairaisa, we have reshus harabim, public domain, and reshus hayachid, private domain. But in Hilchos Shabbos, there are two more reshuyos that we're going to discuss briefly today. We'll probably focus more on that later, different day. But just briefly, reshus harabim and reshus hayachid are the two reshuyos that are considered dairaisa. There's specific numbers that define each one. It has to be 4 tfachim. It has to be 10 tefach wall around it to be considered reshus hayachid. To reshus harabim, it has to be 16 amos wide, surrounding the city. Maybe 600,000 people walk there. These are definitions of reshus harabim and reshus hayachid. But in Hilchos Shabbos, we also find that there's two other types of reshuyos, not dairaisa types, but other types of reshuyos. We have what's called a mekom petur. And what is a mekom petur? It's something that doesn't fit comfortably in the description of reshus harabim, nor in the description of reshus hayachid. Now, mikra din, to carry from reshus harabim to reshus hayachid or vice versa is an iser dairaisa. To carry from a mekom petur to either of those two domains is mutter. Well, it's mutter.
It's mutter.
Mutter.
To carry
from mekom petur, literally like the concept, the word sounds, mekom petur, an exempt reshus. It's not rabim, it's not yachid, it's mutter. Came along the rabbis and they said some of these places that are defined as mekom petur, which we'll get more into later, are actually what we're going to call an iser d'rabbanan of carrying because they're called the carmelis.
And carmelis is a subset of iser petur.
It's a type, yeah. It's a place that shouldn't really be an isser. It's not an isser dairaisa, but the rabbi said, "Midrabanan, you're not allowed to carry from this location, which we're going to now define as carmelis, which is, you could call it a side street, maybe. We'll get to that later in the Masechta. Isser d'Rabbanan to carry from it to reshus harabim or to reshus hayachid. Okay, so far so good. Now comes along Abaye and he says the following: I know that the hand in halacha is not defined as reshus harabim, and it's also not defined as reshus hayachid. Now let me illustrate what Abaye is going to say, and then we'll get to his shaila. We know that the halacha is, if the ani picks something up in the reshus harabim, transfers it into the reshus hayachid, and the balabayas takes it from him. Who's chayev? Neither's chayev. Exactly. Shneim peturin, asera pater avalasser, because the ani did the akira, balabayas picks it up and does the anacha. They're both pater. Now, if you say the ani's hand is considered a reshus harabim, so the balabayas picked it up from reshus harabim and put it down reshus hayachid, he should be chayev. Must be the hand is not considered reshus harabim. Now, the inverse case will prove to you that a hand is not considered reshus hayachid, where the balabayas picks it up in his domain, transfers it outside, and the ani takes it from him and puts it down. They're both pater. They're both pater. Why are they both pater? If it's considered reshus hayachid, but the ani took it from reshus hayachid and put it down. Elama, the hand is not reshus hayachid, nor is it reshus harabim. Okay, so maybe it's mekom petur, which would mean that it doesn't have status of reshus harabim or reshus hayachid. Comes along Abaye, and Abaye asks the following shaila. This is a fascinating shaila. I understand it's not reshus harabim, reshus hayachid. Is it considered a carmelis? Now, what's the nafkamina? How would this play a factor in these halachas? Like this. So the balabaya stretched his hand outside. Now, that was usher to do. He picked it up, reshus hayachid, stretched it out outside. In the current state, is he allowed to retrieve his hand back inside and put the item down? If you say that his hand is considered a carmelis, so there's an iser d'Rabbanan to carry from a carmelis to reshus hayachid. So he would not be allowed to retrieve his hand and put it back down. But if his hand is not a carmelis, it's a mekom petur, he could take it back in and put it down. So the shaila is, could he put his hand back in, i.e. is his hand deemed a carmelis or not? Fascinating shaila. Let's read this inside. Says Abaye, Amar Abaye, Pshitali, it's obvious to me, Yadeh Shel Adam Eino like Reshus Harabim like Reshus HaYachid, that a person's hand is not deemed public domain or private domain. And I'll prove it to you, says Abaye. Reshus Harabim lo damya, it's not considered public domain miyade de ani, because we know from the case of the hand of the ani where he stretches his hand inside, Balabayas takes the item and puts it down. The Balabayas is not chayiv, but if the hand of the ani is like private domain, like public domain, so then the Balabayas should be chayiv. Obviously, it's not Reshus Harabim. It's also not considered Reshus HaYachid miyade de Balabayas, from the case where the Balabayas extends his hand out into the public domain and the ani takes it from and puts it down. Well, if it's private domain, so then the ani should be chayiv. Obviously, it's not Reshus HaYachid. So Abaye, now based on that, Abaye poses the following shaila: is the hand of a person like a carmelis, which would be an iser d'Rabbanan to carry from it to either of those domains? Mi kansur Rabbanan le'ahadur legabe. Do the rabbis penalize him because he started off an iser d'Rabbanan by stretching his hand outside? Let's just stick with that case. The Balabayas picked it up and stretched his hand outside. So you did something wrong. So therefore, there's a knas. Now your hand is like a carmelis, and you cannot retrieve your hand back in and put it down. Oh, lo, or do we say no? His hand's not a carmelis, and he can put it back down in the Reshus HaYachid by retrieving his hand back inside. It's a very interesting shaila.
I don't understand the whole concept of the hand of a body. Why is it different hand in the body, the goof? I don't understand the nafkamina here.
Your body is situated in the Reshus HaYachid.
Well, I understand that.
Your hand is stretched over the Reshus Harabim now.
Right.
If your hand is deemed like a carmelis, so then there would be a prohibition then to retrieve it. That's the shaila. That's the shaila. That's exactly the shaila. Because then to take your hand back inside would be akira from a carmelis, which is your hand, and a hanacha back in Reshus HaYachid. But if we look at your hand not as a carmelis, it's a makom petur, so then you can retrieve your hand and put it back in the Reshus HaYachid.
Isn't a carmelis a location?
So that's the point. It's not Reshus Harabim, your hand. It's not deemed Reshus HaYachid. So it's either a makom petur or it's a carmelis. Shaila is which one? So Tashma, the Gemara says, let's resolve this shaila by quoting contradictory braysos, and then we'll say, actually, this is a machlokes tanoim, if it's a carmelis or not. Tashma, let's bring a raya. The brayso says, if a balabayas' hand was full of fruits, he's standing inside, he picks up fruits, and he extends his hand outside on Shabbos. Tani Chada, one brisa teaches Asr la Chazira. He's not allowed to return it inside, which would imply that brisa holds his hand is like a carmelis. Vitani Idach, and the second brisa teaches Mutter la Chazira. He is allowed to retrieve it, which imply it's a Mekom Petor, it's not a carmelis. So my lab hakamifligi, is this not the point of debate? Demar Savar, that the first brisa that says it's Asr to retrieve Carmelis damya, it's because your hand is like a carmelis, and it's asur d'Rabbanan to return it inside. It's like you did an akira in a carmelis and a hanacha in Reshus HaYachid. Omar Sar, in the second brayso that says muter lachzira lav carmelis damya, he holds your hand is like makom petor. You can put it back inside, no problem. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have 5 pirchas. 5 different ways of explaining those 2 braysos alternatively, so it doesn't necessarily explain that the shaila of Abaye is a machlokes tanoim. Let's go to the first one. No, that's not necessarily the point of contention between these 2 braysos. Dekule alma ke carmelis damya. Maybe both braysos hold that the hand of a person is like a carmelis. Okay, but then I understand why you should not be allowed to retrieve it. But what's the pshat in the brayso that says you are allowed to retrieve it? Velo kashya. Kan lemata me asara. So we're going to learn a lot of halachas today about carrying. This that we're saying he's not allowed to retrieve it, the first brisa, is when he extended it within 10 tefachim of the Reshus Harabim. So that's deemed part of the Reshus Harabim. Since you extended it to an area that's already associated with the Reshus Harabim, there the Chachamim say, this is like a carmelis, you cannot retrieve your hand back inside. And Khan, the second brayso that says muter lachzira, is lemala me'asara. You had your hand extended over 10 tvachim of the public domain, which is considered avir. The avir is not necessarily considered part of the public domain, so you didn't do such an isser yet. So in such a case, you'd be allowed to retrieve your hand back into the private domain. But according to this answer, both braysos hold your hand is considered like a carmelis, just they don't penalize you so much when it's still above 10 tvachim, because that's not like a transfer into a public domain yet. So then we would say both braysos could hold it is like a carmelis. The iba isema, or we'll say the exact opposite way, a second pircha.
If the hand is below 10 tvachim, would you say it's like the ground or no?
To a degree. It's already considered, you didn't do a hanacha on the ground, but you did an isser by doing an akira and haitzah to a public domain. So you did an isser drabanan. But where it's in the avir, you didn't really do it such a stark isser drabanan yet. The Iba Yisema. Now the second pircha says the Gemara is both braysos are talking about where you extend your hand over the public domain within 10 tvachim of the ground. Vilav ke karmelis damya. But both braysos hold your hand is not considered like a karmelis. Now this takes a different approach. This is going to assume the Chachamim do not make your hand like a karmelis. The shaila is, do they extend a direct knas against you for doing something wrong? It's not a karmelis. So to retrieve it is not like bringing it back from a karmelis into reshus hayachid. So the shaila is, did they extend a penalty against you? So what's the machlokes? Velo kashya. So actually it's not a machlokes. There's two cases. Kan, this is a great ukimta. Kan mi be'od yom. The second brisa that says you could retrieve your hand inside is when you stuck your hand outside while it was still Friday. Okay, so it was 5:55 and Shabbos hits at 6. He extended his hand outside on Friday, which means his hand is now situated over an area. You could pull it back in. You actually didn't do anything wrong because the only thing you did wrong is you should have returned your hand in before Shabbos. But actually, the akira wasn't done on Shabbos. So if your hand's not considered a karmelis, to retrieve your hand should be mutter. There, the chachamim are not going to level a knas against you that you have to keep your hand outside and you can't return it. And kan, the first brisa, is mishach hashecha. It's where you extended your hand into the public domain when it was already dark, it was already Shabbos. So you did an isser d'Rabbanan, so now they're going to level a penalty against you so as to say, you can't retrieve your hand back inside. That's the distinction between the braysos. Now, before we even, let me just read that. If you extended your hand while it was still day, meaning it was still Friday, so they don't level a penalty against you, you could retrieve your hand back inside. But if you extended your hand on Shabbos, you already started doing something wrong, so kansur rabbanan, they do give you a penalty. Now you'll ask me, okay, so they give you a penalty, you can't return your hand inside. What are you supposed to do?
You can separate your arm from
the answer is, you'll have to stay in that position for all of Shabbos. In that uncomfortable position, all of Shabbos.
That's the punishment.
Now, let's speak this out for a second. Let's stop for a second. If it's Shabbos, okay, and you extended your hand outside, okay, so you did an akira b'shus hayachid, you extended your hand outside, and now it's hovering over a public domain. If the Chachamim say you have to keep your hand that way all Shabbos, what is the likely reality that's going to happen?
You're going to fall asleep.
Now, so like this. The Mefarshim speak out like this. If an einus happens, your hand becomes so exhausted that you drop it, you're actually not chayiv. But what is also possible that could happen? You'll put it down. Now, if you put it down, what's going to happen? You put it down. What's going to happen now? Is that an Isser D'Rabbanan? Why is that Dairaisa? No, why is it Dairaisa? Because you did an Akira b'Shus HaYachid and an Hanacha b'Shus HaRabin. So what we're saying now is...
You didn't do that on Shabbos. You did that one before.
No. When are you allowed to retrieve your hand? It's when you did the Akira and extended your hand before Shabbos. When are you not allowed to retrieve your hand? It's when you did the Akira on Shabbos and stuck your hand outside. So what the Chachamim are now saying is, hear this good. In the second brisa, mutter lachazira, it's when you extended your hand before Shabbos. You didn't do something wrong other than the fact that you should have returned your hand before Shabbos. In such a case, you could return your hand on Shabbos. But where you extended your hand on Shabbos, the halacha is you're not allowed to return your hand. So what the Chachamim are now saying is, you have to remain in that position. You're not allowed to put it down, because if you put it down, that would be an Isser Dairaisa.
What if you bring it back and don't put it down? What if you bring it back and don't put it
That's
down?
the knas we're saying. That's the knas. The Chacham say you cannot return it to reshus hayachid, and if you would, you'd be over on Isser D'Rabbanan, and if you would put it down to reshus harabim, you're over on Isser D'Oraisa. Frek the Gemara, Adarabba, Ibcha Mistavra. Wait a second. The exact opposite application of halachas should really make more sense. Why? Where he extended his hand on Friday, the Ishadi lay. even if he would put his hand, the item down into the reshus harabim, what has he done at worst?
Nothing.
He done an Isser D'Rabbanan, the Hanocha b'Reshus Harabim, but the Akira was before Shabbos. So the worst case scenario is going to be over an Isser D'Rabbanan. So there, Lo Yasi Lidei Chiyuv Chatas. He won't come to an Isser D'Oraisa Michayav Chatas. So there we should say Liknesur Rabbanan. Maybe there the rabbis should say, since at worst what's going to happen if he puts it down should be an Isser D'Rabbanan, there we'll say, so you learn your lesson and you don't do this in the future, you should have to keep your hand out there for all of Shabbos. One second. Mishach HaShecha. But if he extended his hand when it was already Shabbos, if he ultimately puts it down in public domain, what's going to happen? So frek the Gemara, they should not level a knas against him, because now what you're requiring him to do, in the case when he extended his hand on Shabbos, is to keep his hand in an uncomfortable position, risking an Isser D'Oraisa. So frek the Gemara, where he extended his hand on Friday, maybe knas him there. He should have returned his hand. He should learn for next Shabbos he'll do differently. But it won't come to an Isser D'Oraisa. So you want to give him a penalty, fine. But where it could lead to an Isser D'Oraisa, why are you leveling an Isser D'Rabbanan against him, not to return it? And then you're potentially causing him to do an Isser D'Oraisa. But the Gemara doesn't answer this way, and therefore the Gemara draws the following conclusion, a fascinating conclusion. The fact that we're not making that ukimta in the Brisa, tipshat to Rav Bibi bar Abaye. We can resolve a shaila of Rav Bibi bar Abaye. It's interesting. Abaye asked the original question, and his son Rav Bibi bar Abaye had a different shaila. What we just finished saying is that in a scenario he stretches his hand out during the day, meaning, on Shabbos already, he's not allowed to return his hand. I.e., the Chachamim give him a penalty. You can't bring it back in, which would be an Isser D'Rabbanan. We're giving you an Isser D'Rabbanan, even though that's risking an Isser D'Oraisa. Now listen to Rav Bibi bar Abaye's shaila. Rav Bibi bar Abaye wondered like this. We know baking on Shabbos is definitely an Isser D'Oraisa. We know about that. We also know that back in the day, the ovens they used to put bread on the sides, dough on the sides of the ovens, and it would bake. To remove bread from an oven on Shabbos is not an Isser D'Oraisa because it's considered a chachma and not a malacha. However, it is an Isser D'Rabbanan. Why is it an Isser D'Rabbanan to remove bread from the oven on Shabbos? Either because it might lead to actual baking, or because it's uvda dechol. It's considered a mundane weekday behavior. So now listen to this shaila of Rav Bibi bar Abaye. A person inadvertently or advertently put dough in a hot oven on Shabbos. Now, if he waits 10 minutes, it'll be over an Isser D'Oraisa, it'll bake. If he removes it now, he's doing
just
an Isser D'Rabbanan. Is he allowed to do the Isser D'Rabbanan to save himself from an Isser D'Oraisa? Sagt the Gemara, the fact that we're not giving the Ukimta here, that he is allowed to retrieve his hand to do an Isser D'Rabbanan, but we're penalizing him, keep your hand out there, even though it might lead to an Isser D'Oraisa, putting it down in reshus harabim, shows us the Chachamim made a chizuk le'divrayim, that they said, we will penalize you, D'Rabbanan, even though it might lead to an Isser D'Oraisa, and he can't remove the bread from the oven in that case. So the resolution of that shaila is based on the way we resolve this contradiction in the Brisa. Says the Gemara, Tipshet de Rav Bibi bar Abaye, Debai Rav Bibi bar Abaye, because Abaye asked the following shaila. Hidvik pas betanor, if somebody stuck dough on Shabbos to the oven, the hot oven, is he allowed to remove it from that, thereby doing an Isser D'Rabbanan to prevent an Isser D'Oraisa? Or do the Chacham not allow it? So says the Gemara, Tipshet Tiru. So from the fact that he can't retrieve his hand back into private domain, and they give him a Knas D'Rabbanan that might lead to an Isser D'Oraisa, that would imply he cannot remove the bread from the oven, thereby transgressing an Isser D'Rabbanan, keeping the Isser D'Rabbanan, even though it will lead to an Isser D'Oraisa of baking. So we resolve the shaila. So the Gemara says, "Holy kashi, that's not a difficulty. That would be a good resolution. The way we explained the Brisa before, it is the genuine resolution
with a lesser punishment."
The Iba, you say, but the Gemara says, I'll give you a third way to resolve these two Brisa, that it's not a raya to Abaye's original shaila, but it also doesn't resolve Rabbi bar Abaye's shaila. La'olam le'tipshut. Really, it could be this does not resolve Rabbi bar Abaye's shaila. V'lai kashya. But still, there's no difficulty between the two Brisa. Kan, the second Brisa that says you could return your hand inside, b'shoigeg. Really, the second Brisa is when you put your hand outside on Shabbos, b'shoigeg, accidentally. Kan b'mezid. And the first brisa, you could return you cannot return your hand inside. One that says you have to leave it outside, that's where you put your hand outside intentionally on Shabbos. Now comes along Rashi and he says, how is this not a resolution to Rabbi Bar Abaye's shaila? Because Rabbi Bar Abaye still could prove from this, you could say, is that you see from the case of shoygeg, you're not allowed to bring your hand, you could bring your hand back in, that you could avoid an Isser D'Oraisa by doing an Isser D'Rabbanan. So Rashi says like this, he says two steps here. You don't necessarily have that proof. Why don't you have that proof? Because in the case of Rdias HaPas, there's an existing Isser D'Rabbanan to remove bread from the oven. So perhaps there they will not allow you to do an Isser D'Rabbanan to avoid an Isser D'Oraisa. But in this case, to bring your hand back in, there's no Isser in the first place. Comes along the Chum, we're going to give you a penalty. So we won't give you a penalty when it comes to Shogeg. And he says further, says Rashi, and in the case of Mazid, you can't prove the Esser, to Aser it either. The guy, Yochai, this morning, he chapped this, which is Gevaldik. He said, because look, in the case of Rdias HaPas, if you leave the bread on that oven, it's not maybe you'll come to an Isser D'Oraisa. 10 minutes, it's gonna bake and you'll be over D'Oraisa. So maybe there the Chacham would allow you to remove it. Here, holding your hand outside, maybe you're a strong guy and you'll be able to keep it and you won't be over an Isser D'Oraisa. So you can't prove from this third ukimta to the shaila of Rabbi Bar Abaye. Let's continue. We have to finish up here. The ibai seima, or I'll tell you a fourth way to prove that these two braysos are not necessarily a proof to Rabbi Abaye's original shaila. Idi b'shogeg. Both scenarios are you put your hand outside b'shogeg inadvertently. V'hacha becomes b'shogeg atu mezid kamiflagi. So machlekes, if you wouldn't be allowed to retract your hand b'mezid, do we extend that to b'shogeg as well, or do we not? That's the shaila. Mar Savar Kansushoy get to Mezid. The first brisa holds that we do create that knas. Mar Savar like Kansushoy get to Mezid. The second brisa says we don't extend the knas. The Iba Yisema final ukimta, the final way of resolving these two brisais, it's not a riot to Abaye's shaila. Lo'ilam like Kansu. Really, we would not extend a knas from Mezid all the way to Shogeg. The lo kashya, but it's not a difficulty. Kan la'osa chatzer, kan la'chatzer acheres. Turning to Daled Amud Aleph. The difference between the two brisais is, I'll explain it in a minute. If you retract your hand and put the item down in someone else's chatzir, that will be aser. But if you retract your hand into your own chatzir, that will be mutter. Now let me explain this outside and then we'll go weiter. What's the difference? When you took the item out of your area, your reshus hayachid, and extended it, there's really two kavanas that you had. You had two intentions. One intention was to put it into the public domain. The other was to remove it from your courtyard. Where you put it into somebody else's chatzir, it's true you're not putting it into the reshus harabim as you originally intended, but part of your intention is being fulfilled that it's no longer in your courtyard. So the chachamim are going to say you're not allowed to do that because that fulfills part of your original intention, which is aser. But to put it back into your courtyard where you removed it from in the first place, that means you're undoing any of your original intent. That would be mutter lahachzira. As Rav asked Rav Nachman, if somebody's hand was full of fruits and he extended his hand outside, so can he return it to his own courtyard? Rav Nachman said it's mutter. What about to put it into someone else's courtyard? Rav Nachman said that's prohibited. So Rav asked Rav Nachman, what's the difference? So Rav Nachman responded in jest. He said, this is an expression, two ways to learn this in Rashi. Either it means when you measure out a kur of salt, or it means when you eat a kur of salt. Either way, there's such a distinction, and I'll explain it to you. Hasam, over there, when he's putting it in the same chatzir that he removed it, he's not fulfilling his original intention in any way, because he's bringing it back to exactly where it started. But you put it in a different courtyard, you fulfilled part of your intention, because it's true, it's not in reshus harabim, but it's in a different domain, it's out of your domain. So therefore, that would be prohibited. You'd have to be aser lachzir, not allowed to put it back into there. All right, but bottom line is, we have not resolved Abaye's shaila. We've given different ukimtas how to get out of it, but practically the shaila is upheld to some degree. And we've explained on both sides if it would be, everyone holds it is a carmelist, everyone holds not a carmelist, and other ways of explaining that, those two bright sides. We'll stop here at the top of Daled Amud Aleph. Pick up tomorrow with Daled Amud Aleph with Gufa. Ezras Hashem.